Hi, I'm Alan Footman. I'm a sports tour operator from Cape Town. My family and I have been living in the southern suburbs for 21 years. What we love about the neighborhood is it's very family orientated. Lots of things for the kids to do, especially here where we are next to the farm, where folk can walk the dog, go for runs and enjoy the fresh air. In the southern suburbs, we're lucky enough to have some of the top schools in the country, and on top of that we have the University of Cape Town, one of the most famous universities in the world. Newlands is a great suburb, all the sporting amenities, Newlands rugby ground, cricket ground, etc. Down the road at Claremont, lots of shopping centres for the kids and for the mothers to do their shopping. Fantastic pubs and restaurants around like Forries, Springbok Bar. Bishop's Court is full of beautiful upmarket homes. Kirstenbosch Gardens, National Botanical Gardens right next door. What attracted us to Constantia is the large open spaces. I've always wanted to be a farmer, and now I'm living next to Constantia Wine Estate, the oldest wine farm in the country, where you have fantastic wines, great restaurants, got the best of both worlds. My family and I have loved every moment of living in Constantia. We couldn't be happier, and this is our neighborhood.
Good evening and welcome to episode 44 of the Private Property Podcast. I'm your host, Zama Khumalo. Now, many of us probably find ourselves living in body corp or in properties that are part of body corporate. So perhaps you're renting in a property where it is run by a body corporate or a homeowners association, and there are rules that you might not particularly agree with, and that's what we're going to be exploring tonight. Whether some of these rules are perhaps unreasonable, or what some of the sense or the reason behind some of them. And I'm sure that a lot of people, maybe perhaps even trustees, and think what the rules that are set are really good as a community, and make sure that you don't get it unreasonable in the context that you said that we want to hear all about them. This evening we'll be unpacking whether or not the body corporate rules are unreasonable or ridiculous, or reasonable rather, or ridiculous. And of course we are running that competition where you stand a chance of winning one of two 1,000 Rand prizes, and all you have to do is share what your property dreams, goals and ambitions are. Share them down here below and you stand a chance of winning one of two 1,000 Rand prizes. One of my colleagues let me know that I said we're going to be announcing the winner this Friday, but it's actually next week Friday. So that is next week Friday when we'll be announcing the winner. So you simply do not want to miss that one. And of course, entering is very simple. We are of course now coming live, not just on Facebook, but also on YouTube. Welcome to all our viewers who are watching us on YouTube. It's really great to have you with us. You can also send through your questions on YouTube and we will be addressing them. But without any more delays, I'm going to welcome this evening's guest, who is Zerlinda, who's a co-founder and director of TVDM Consultants. Zerlinda, thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you so much. Good evening all. Thank you for the opportunity.
So I think before we even, unpack whether these rules are unreasonable or they're ridiculous or why we even have them, perhaps let's take a step back and look at, the role of the body corporate. Because sometimes, when you buy into a place that's run by a body corporate, or a sectional title rather, you typically have never really, dealt with a body corporate before and may not be acquainted with them. I mean, I know that when I bought in, it was quite a foreign experience, especially if you're moving from home and let's say you were living in a house and there was never anybody who presided over, the complex or the estate and had to set these rules. So certainly the first time you encounter having to deal with the body corporate and that there are these rules, because they also send you that info pack just after moving in, it can be quite of a surprise because we're just not used to it. So perhaps, give our viewers a sense of what exactly is the role of the body corporate.
Fantastic. I think I'm actually going to steal the term that you used of a body presiding over you. And that's very often what a body corporate and the committee of trustees or the board of directors are seen as, almost like a presiding officer in the court where they're both the judge and the jury. And that's a position that they very often are placed in. And what I've found when I've spoken at the shows before is that a lot of people that are coming into sectional title homeowners associations are just like you described, not only first-time homeowners, but first-time owners and residents in community schemes. And it's quite a shock for the system if it's not something that you're used to or something that you have knowledge about. And very often people don't have that knowledge. The knowledge is a lot more available now with social media and Facebook groups and opportunities and events and talks and things like that. And there's so much knowledge out there. The legislation has also become quite consumer friendly, so it's a lot easier to understand the dynamics of community scheme living. But when it affects you personally and more importantly your investment, unfortunately the nails do come out, and sometimes one isn't as reasonable as one should be in the circumstances. And I think the confusion that I suppose we could clear up right at the beginning, and it deals mostly with sectional title, is that there's always a confusion between, I like to call the us and the them, the body corporates and the trustees. And very often owners say, the body corporate didn't allow us to do this, or the body corporate didn't allow me to bring my pet in, or whatever it might be. And it must be understood that every single owner of a unit in a sectional title scheme is a member of that body corporate, whether or not they like it or not. It's the trustees that are ultimately the decision makers, but even them don't have unlimited and unfettered discretion when it comes to decision making. And I think it's something that we'll unpack a little bit this evening. So knowledge is definitely key when buying into community schemes.
And let's get, to the parameters of the trustees, because I'm one of the trustees in some of the properties that I'm in, and as you're saying, there certainly are certain decisions that we're able to make, and there's certain decisions that we don't. Perhaps let's look at, the parameters that the trustees are essentially working around.
So that's actually probably one of the easiest things to look for in the legislation, the Sectional Title Schemes Management Act, is what trustees can take decisions on and what members can take decisions on. And there's different levels of decision making. Trustees make decisions by a majority consent. Very often they do all agree and very often they don't. And sometimes the chairperson has to, cast an additional vote if there's a tie in voting. But the Act is very clear as to exactly what the parameters of the trustees' functions and powers are. It's set out in the legislation, it's set out in the rules of the body corporate if the rules are different to those of the Act. And of course, the members every single year at the annual general meeting have an opportunity to give the trustees more powers or to restrict their powers. And that's a line item at every single annual general meeting that must be noted and dealt with. And unfortunately, very often is misunderstood, and the opportunity isn't used at a meeting to actually set those parameters. And it's what the legislation calls restrictions or directives. It's taking away some power and giving some power, and that way ultimately controlling how the body corporate is run. Because although you have a group of trustees taking decisions, ultimately the decisions are there for the interests of all the members of the body corporate, and therefore they should have the ultimate votes. Some of the things that trustees can take decisions on are relatively simple. There's actually a lot less that trustees can take decisions on now under the new legislation. I say new, but it came out in 2016 than in the older legislation. I mean, things that we deal with very often in sectional title as owners and residents is things like pet applications are things that the trustees can decide on. Renovations and alterations are things that trustees can decide on. Raising a special levy is a big one. People necessarily think just because it's called a special levy that it needs a special resolution or at least some type of member input, and it doesn't. It's only a trustee decision, and very often it's a very difficult position to be in as a trustee, to take that decision to ask the members for more money above and beyond the levies that they're paying, but sometimes it's very necessary. You know, the implementation of the budget and putting together a budget is a trustee decision, but ultimately the approval of the budget rests on the members. So for every decision the trustees take, there is very much a counter decision that needs to be taken by the members. And of course, all trustee decisions can be challenged as well. So those are some of the few of the examples of trustee decisions. There aren't a lot of them, as I said, but the Act is very clear as to where trustees can act and can't act, and also very clear as to the parameters in which the trustees must act, in that they don't exceed those powers, that they don't act contrary to what the members would require them to do or would want them to do.
And perhaps then, you know, and it's something that you touched on, but I want us to be quite explicit in addressing it, is the issue on who elects the trustees and when they get elected. Because, you know, as we're saying, a lot of people who will move into, you know, properties that are governed by community schemes often wouldn't have encountered things like an AGM or even understanding what happens at an AGM. I've never attended an AGM that meets quorum, which is always an issue. So always having to come back the following week, and only then can decisions be made. So even issues like that, I think a lot of owners certainly don't quite understand the importance of even attending that AGM, even though it's communicated, you know, in advance, and emails are sent and SMSs are sent, but we still don't quite appreciate the power that we have. And it really is that one evening or perhaps that one afternoon in the whole year where we get to address issues that affect us in that particular complex or estate. Perhaps let's look at, you know, how we go about, you know, electing them, who elects them, and even the importance of the AGM.
100%. So, you know, the annual general meeting in a lot of schemes is that one opportunity per year that members actually have, number one, to meet each other, to engage with each other, but to take important decisions and to have an input in the affairs of the body corporate and the administration and management. Not many schemes have multiple meetings. They don't have events that they arrange for their members. They don't have a lot of special general meetings. So it's very important to, number one, arrange that annual general meeting correctly, and number two, for members to attend it. And it always happens that it's, you know, on an evening that's rainy and cold and people don't want to venture out of their house to go to, or it's on a Saturday morning and they can't be bothered to give up their time, or, you know, they don't like so-and-so that might be there, so they decide not to go. And, you know, that's why the legislature has always provided for proxies. So you're able as a member to give anybody, it doesn't have to be a member, anybody your proxy, and you can instruct them as to how to vote or what questions to answer. So you can say, you know, if Zerlinda is going to stand as a trustee, please do not vote for her because I don't like her. Or if they're going to try to increase the budget by more than 10%, please vote against it. You can give instructions. And it's probably better to give instructions because you don't want to face a case of broken telephone where your proxy gets handed over, because that's another thing to remember, is that a proxy can be substituted to somebody else, which means if your proxy holder can't attend the meeting, they can hand it to someone else. And if you've given your proxy holder instructions and they don't give those instructions over, that person that you didn't want to vote for can perhaps be the next chairperson. You know, attending an annual general meeting is vitally important. It's not generally a long meeting. I mean, I've been to annual general meetings that go on for 5-6 hours. I've been to ones that last for 20 minutes. You know, the agenda has become quite administratively cumbersome. So simply getting through the formalities is sometimes quite an extensive process, and sometimes quite a boring one as well. And people don't necessarily want to sit through that. I attend many meetings where somebody with an agenda themselves will attend a meeting only to the point that they've dealt with their issue and then get up and leave. And unfortunately, that affects the quorum. So you always need to understand that when you're in it for the long haul, and to attend an annual general meeting in the interest of all the members of the body corporate and not just yourself. Very often people become or make themselves available to be trustees simply because they've got their own individual agenda. You know, that chairperson was the main cause why my pet wasn't accepted into the scheme. I'm going to make sure that I become the next chairperson to make sure that he's not allowed to bring his pet in, or whatever it might be. There's always quite personal issues involved. I mean, my own very first personal experience about becoming a trustee myself was because I had a personal agenda. I wanted to make sure that the trustees didn't raise a special levy because I could only afford my monthly levy. I couldn't afford more. I wanted to be in that seat of power that made sure that no special levy was going to be raised. And only after taking on that role did I realize, you know, it's not just about me, it's about all the members of the body corporates. And yes, I might have my own individual agenda, but at the end of the day, I do have to put that aside and look at what is best for the body corporate as a whole. And it's actually so nice to be involved in those types of body corporates, to see that realization hits a trustee and for them to start really caring about more than just their own interests, because at the end of the day, they do live in a community. But to answer your initial question about the election of the trustee, so any person can be nominated and elected as a trustee. Under the old legislation, the Sectional Titles Act, you had to be an owner or the spouse of an owner, the majority of the trustees, that is, to be able to be in that position. Now, any individual can be a trustee. Any representative of a juristic entity can be a trustee. You don't have to be an owner. You don't have to be the spouse of an owner. You don't have to even be a tenant. You can be a complete outsider. And this has also increased the position of professional trustees in a trustee committee, both in body corporates as well as in homeowners associations where the governance documents allow for it. And that is where you pay somebody to be in the position of a trustee, because we know that not only is being a trustee a thankless job, but it's also an unpaid job, and you only get compensated for the actual expenses you incur, for example, your airtime or your printing costs or something along those lines. It's only when the members resolve by a special resolution to give you some form of remuneration that you're actually compensated. And to date, I've never been to a successful annual general meeting where the trustees have been remunerated. It's sort of like, well, if you're not going to do it for free, then don't make yourself available type of thing. But then nobody else wants to make themselves available. So trustees are nominated 48 hours before the annual general meeting by way of a trustee nomination form. If there aren't sufficient trustee nominations received at the annual general meeting, then the chairperson, or perhaps if the managing agent is assisting, can call for nominations from the floor. There must be a proposer, and then of course the person that is nominated must accept that. And if you look at the trustee nomination form, it's pretty much in the same wording as that as well. I've been to meetings before where nobody has wanted to make themselves available for the position of trustees. All the trustees have resigned. And I've sat at meetings before literally trying to coax people into that position to say, just stand as a trustee this evening and tomorrow morning you can resign, just that we can successfully conclude the business of this meeting and go ahead. You know, that's not a great position to be in, which is why perhaps employing or appointing rather professional trustees is a good idea. That's a service that we offer, for example, where not only are you filling a seat where a seat is not able to be filled, but you're bringing a certain skill set to the table as well. What I like to propose or to suggest to trustees and managing agents when they prepare the notice for the annual general meeting is to actually ask for a little bit of a write-up or a CV on the nominees. So to give their interest in the scheme, maybe how long they've been residing there, you know, what they like or don't like about the scheme, what they would like to change about the scheme, you know, what they appreciate the previous trustees doing, projects that they'd like to continue with, and of course a little bit of something about them and what they have to offer. So very often a scheme can actually divide its responsibilities into portfolios, perhaps legal, financial, gardens, landscaping, architectural, and you would want somebody that has at least a little bit of knowledge in those areas to actually take the responsibility for those portfolios. So it might not be a great idea to have, you know, 5 trustees that are all legal eagles, because they might be absolutely rubbish when it comes to financial management. So that's something to look at. When it comes to outsiders being trustees, many body corporates don't like the concept of somebody with no vested interest being a trustee. But if owners aren't going to make themselves available to be trustees, what other option exists? In terms of the new legislation, there is the possibility of the body corporate appointing by special resolution an executive managing agent. And this is an area that I do see in future is going to become quite popular. It's very slow on the uptake at the moment, but it basically means that if a body corporate appoints an executive managing agent, there is no need for trustees. Some body corporates that appoint executive managing agents perhaps like to keep 2 trustees in the background just to supervise the executive managing agent, but the legislation doesn't actually require that to take place. So there you've invested all of your trust and your interest in one individual that actually has nothing to do with the body corporate. And there's nothing that says the one option is better than the other, or the one option is right or wrong. It depends from scheme to scheme. Sometimes you'll have a committee of trustees that are trustees for years on end because there's no issues in the scheme. Other times you can have chop and changing all the time. So it all depends on the scheme, but it's up to the members to decide who those trustees are going to be through the process of election.
Okay, we're going to take a quick break, Zerlinda, and we've got quite a few questions and comments from viewers at home. And one of the issues that I wanted to pick up on after the break is also the issue of levies. I'm seeing some of the questions have to do with levies. I'm sure many of us, have had many headaches when it comes to the issue of levies, whether you live in a complex or an estate where the levies are quite high and you're not quite sure how they got there, or a special resolution was passed and there's suddenly a special levy that's been raised and it's substantially high and nobody seems to be able to account to how is that actually came about. So we'll be going for a quick break. When we come back, we'll be taking more of your questions and comments. Welcome back to episode 44 of the Private Property Podcast. I'm your host, Zama Kumale. This evening, we're talking about body corporate rules, reasonable or ridiculous. And my guest this evening is Zerlinda van der Merwe, who is the co-founder and director of TVDM Consultants. Now, before the break, Zerlinda, I did say I wanted to talk a little bit about levies. And one of the questions comes from Howard Mukatana, who says, but guys, can we talk about levies of over 2,500? How do body corporates get to those amounts? What is the reasoning behind how we get to the amount? I mean, we certainly have an appreciation for what the money does because we live in the stage of the complex and we can see the security, the garden is being tended to. But certainly in some instances, somebody's levy is 1.2, then it's now suddenly above 2.5 with other people. I've seen levy statements, going to 3.5 or even higher. How do body corporates actually come up with how much they essentially end up charging for levies?
Yeah. So you basically answered that yourself, just looking at the facilities and the amenities of the scheme. So some things that you need to remember is you need to compare apples with apples. So don't go and compare a levy of a homeowners association with a levy of a body corporates, because the two different types of community schemes are very unique. In a homeowners association, you own the earth and the property upon which is built on the earth. And in a body corporate, you simply own the inside of the unit up until the median line. All the rest is common property, and that's what is budgeted for. So normally levies in homeowners associations are quite low, and very often, irrespective of the size of the property in a homeowners association, all the owners pay the same levy. But in a sectional title scheme, everybody pays differently because because it's dependent on their floor area or participation quota, the Act calls it. And some of the things that is made up in a levy, I mean, everything is set out in the budget. A levy cannot be determined if a budget isn't set. And that budget is dealt with on an annual basis. It's approved by the members. So although it's the trustees' decision to put a budget together and to present it, it's the members' decision to actually approve it. And you have to look at what is the common property. What does a common property entail? You know, do you have electric fencing that requires maintenance and repair and replacement when necessary? Do you have a swimming pool, a clubhouse, a tennis court, those types of lovely facilities? Do you have security? Do you have concierge? Do you have security cameras? Do you have employees? Do you have cleaners, landscapers? Do you have a managing agent? Insurance, rates? You know, these are the types of items that a body corporate's budget entails. Financial management fees, audit fees, savings, and something that has increased levies quite substantially since the introduction of the Sectional Title Schemes Management Act is a reserve fund and the portion of the levy that goes towards that. So the Sectional Titles Act has always provided that a body corporate must keep aside a reasonable provision for future repairs and maintenance. But the Sectional Title Schemes Management Act made it a statutory requirement that not only do you have an administrative fund that you cater for in your budget, but you have a reserve fund as well. And that reserve fund is to deal with the maintenance and the repair and the replacement when necessary of the infrastructure in the body corporate. And sometimes that pushes the levy up quite a bit. So it's those items. But to answer the question quite simply is you can't compare and you have to look at the budget. Each scheme is very, very different.
And still on the issue of levies, we've got a question here, or rather a comment from Andrika Lehanyan, who says, the issue of levies should be thoroughly explained to new residents pre and post transfer. Owners have the right to ask what these levies are used for and where possible request audited financials, which is of course something that, you know, sometimes people don't know that they're even able to ask for before they buy into a body corporate. Another question this time around, coming from Mandy Mdaga, who asks, I'd like to know if body corporates should have different levies for duplex units. If I'm living on a top unit with no garden or washing line, etc., why should my levy pay for someone's exclusive use of garden and maintenance thereof?
Yeah. So to answer the first question, yes, you're quite right. You know, it's before you buy into a sectional title scheme, you have to acquaint yourself with what you're getting into. The same for a homeowners association. And you have the right to ask your potential seller, you know, give me a copy of the rules, give me a copy of the constitution or the memorandum of incorporation if it's for an HA, give me a copy of the budget, give me a copy of the last audited financial statements. That is the only way you're going to understand if the body corporate or HA you're buying into has a healthy financial management system in place, or if there's cause for concern. You know, you can, when you're walking around the property on Sundays, when you go and view it, have a look. Is it face brick? Okay, that means that there's less maintenance required. Is it right by the beach? Well, that means we're going to paint a heck of a lot more often. You know, is there security guards? Is there employees? Are there a lot of common facilities? That immediately means that the levy is going to be higher. But you have to acquaint yourself with that information before you sign on the dotted line. Otherwise, unfortunately, you can't really, you know, go and ask questions after the fact or try to dispute it after the fact. You have to make yourselves aware. So the education in that regard is very important. The second question about, you know, the different levy structures, like I mentioned earlier, in a sectional title scheme, you pay according to your floor area. So if you have a larger apartment, you'd be paying a higher levy than your neighbors. So if I've got a 3-bedroom apartment, I'm going to be paying more than my 1-bedroom apartment neighbor next door to me. But you can't necessarily look at, you know, what is the structure of the unit that's going to affect the levies. For example, the person that asked the question said it might have a garden or a porch or a patio. Very often that garden or porch or patio isn't part of the section in a body corporate. It might be an exclusive use area, which means you don't pay a levy on it, you pay a contribution. And that contribution is not determined according to your floor area. It's just to defray the expenses relating to that particular portion of common property, because an exclusive use area in its nature is always going to remain common property. So you first have to, again, go and have a look and see, is that part of the section? Is it an exclusive use area? Is it common property? Is it subject to a lease? And that will determine whether or not that person should be paying more. So you could have a very small apartment and your neighbor could have a very large one, and your balcony is 10 times bigger than theirs, but you're paying a lot less. And that's because that balcony is not part of the section. So you have to go and look at the rules, the sectional plans, the budget, to be able to understand where that differentiation comes in. And like I said earlier, a homeowners association, very often, despite the sometimes vast differences in size of the urban and the houses built upon those urban, the levies can sometimes be exactly the same and generally a lot less than a body corporate. So you need to look at those types of things before you, make your decision as to buying into a scheme.
Comment. This one coming from Bruno De Santos, who says, I find it very strange that one is not allowed to hang clothing on a balcony as it looks untidy, but overseas it's a norm. And here the designated hanging area is not big enough for everyone to hang your clothing, and your clothing sometimes goes missing or stolen. And he says that he finds that to be a very strange rule. A question this time around coming from Rinesha Deanad, who says, Can one vote a trustee of the body corporate who bends the rules to suit him or herself?
Yeah, let's deal with the washing line element first. And that this comes into the topic of today's discussion about reasonable rules or unreasonable rules or ridiculous rules. And that might be seen as a ridiculous rule. But have you ever driven past a block of flats and you look up at it and there's a carpet hanging over the balcony, there's a wetsuit hanging over the balcony, there's a makeshift laundry line, there's a clothes horse. It doesn't look great. But on the other hand, you have to understand that when you're living in an apartment, sometimes you don't have enough space to have a washing machine, a tumble dryer. Yes, sometimes there isn't even a designated washing line. So it's very difficult, and it's a lot of weighing up of rights when it comes to the application of rules in a body corporate. The prescribed rules under the Sectional Title Schemes Management Act immediately speaks about, not using your section or exclusive use in an area in a way that is going to be undesirable. The old act used to speak about harmonious appearance. In other words, aesthetics and appearance is very important in a body corporate perspective. If you again go drive around on a Sunday looking for an apartment, the smallest thing is going to turn you off about that block of flats and perhaps even devalue it. And unfortunately, washing hanging over the balcony is one of those. So again, it's important to look at the rules to see what the circumstances are with regards to that, to see perhaps if the body corporate has the space to put up more washing lines or a better place to put it, or perhaps to put a lock on the gate so people don't come in and steal their garments, or perhaps even have a laundry facility where there's tumble dryers that you don't have to worry. I mean, I lived in a one-bedroom flat and drying my laundry was an absolute nightmare that I couldn't put it out in the sun. So it really is unfortunately something that becomes quite a big bugbear. The second question, the dealing with trustees and getting trustees out of that position or to vacate that office. It can be done. So the trustees can decide to remove a chairperson from the position as chairperson, but not from the position as trustees. The decision to elect and then, of course, to remove trustees rests with the owners, unless somebody resigns during the course of their term and the remainder co-opt or replace that trustee. It always goes back to the members. So in order to remove a trustee, either the remainder of the trustees by majority trustee resolution needs to call a special general meeting, and the members need to decide to have that person removed following motivation, or a group of owners representing 25% of the total participation quota of the scheme can request that the trustees call a meeting to remove a trustee. And of course, that decision has to be clearly, and perhaps there needs to be an opportunity for replacement trustees to make themselves available to be elected into that position. But the reason for that particular question's removal of the trustee, dealing with the trustee taking decisions for their own purpose, the Act says that as a trustee, you can't breach your fiduciary duty to the body corporate by exercising your interests above those of the body corporate. You can't take part in decisions and discussions where there's a conflict of interest. The Act speaks about you can't have a direct or indirect interest in any decision the body corporate is taking. So the trustees always have to be very aware of wearing their individual, this is my personal decision hat, and this is my hat that I'm wearing as a trustee to take decisions for the whole body corporate. And if they don't do that, yes, they can be removed.
And before I let you go, Zerlinda, any tips you'd like to share with our viewers at home when it comes to dealing with certainly, the body corporates that run the community schemes that they live in, and even tips for members who are actually trustees, because I think some of them perhaps are still trying to get acquainted with their role. Perhaps some of them are not taking it as seriously. As you're saying, perhaps they've probably got a vested personal interest, and that's why they decided to become trustees. Any tips you'd like to share with viewers at home that can help them better mitigate the relationship that they have with the trustees of where they live in?
Yeah. So, the most important tip, in my opinion, that I can give is that trustees, owners, tenants, managing agents, potential owners in a sectional title scheme or a homeowners association should do everything that they can to educate themselves, not only about that specific scheme that they want to purchase into or that they're involved in, but about sectional title, homeowners associations, community schemes in general. And there's so many resources out there to do that. Things that courses that give you certificates and free training sessions or a Saturday morning opportunity, and just basically material out there. And the legislation is so easy to read as well that one can do so quite easily. The biggest or the best solution to any problem that an owner might be experiencing or a resident in the scheme might be experiencing is participating and making themselves available not only to be trustees, but to support the trustees, perhaps on a subcommittee level, or just attending meetings and giving viable input. Not all criticism needs to be negative criticism. It can be positive as well, but you're only in a position to do that if you avail yourself and offer that support to the trustee committee if you aren't willing to be a trustee yourself. And then, of course, before you move into a sectional title scheme or homeowners association, acquaint yourself with that association. Ask for the budget, ask for the annual statement, ask for any of them. If the scheme doesn't allow for dogs, don't decide to move in there with your dogs and deal with the consequences afterwards. You need to be cognizant of the fact that you need to abide with those rules before you even move in, before you even sign on the dotted line. You need to understand what you're getting yourself in for. And if you're not up for it, then rather go and find that freestanding house in the suburbs as opposed to that community scheme. So I think those are the three tips and tricks that I can share with you this evening.
Zerlinda, thank you so much. We definitely will be, bringing you back in still quite a number of questions that viewers have when it comes to community schemes, because I'm sure many of us might have encountered, the people who run the various complexes or estates that we live in, and still have quite a number of questions when it comes to it. And even better understanding how we can play a better role, certainly as residents, in how our community schemes are run is certainly a lesson that a lot of us need. Zerlinda, thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you so much for the opportunity.
And that is Zerlinda van der Merwe, who is the co-founder and director of TVDM Consultants. Well, there you have it, folks. I know that I've certainly learned quite a bit around managing the relationship that we have with the body corporate or even trustees. And even as a trustee myself, I think I've certainly learned a thing or two, and really want to implore many of us who live in complexes or estates to play a more active role in those particular communities. Because I think oftentimes, and as we said even in this episode, is that we don't meet quorum when we have AGMs, which does pose its own challenge, because the moment decisions are made, you feel as though they're imposed on you and you didn't have a say in them. So I do implore you to attend those meetings and have your say, and whatever issues, to table them at that AGM. Well, we'll be back tomorrow. It's going to be a Friday. You do not want to miss tomorrow's episode. We're going to be looking at something that a lot of investors and certainly property owners have been affected by, especially those who are in the short-term rental space. So you don't want to miss it. We're going to be having a guest that we've had before. And if you want to know who, then you need to tune in tomorrow. Until then, I hope you're staying home and you're staying safe.
Hi, I'm Nobuntu Webster. I'm an entrepreneur. I moved to Sandton to pursue a dream. I've based myself in Sandton because it's the gateway to Africa. The neighborhood of Sandton is alive. It's alive with possibility. It's got the most amazing vibe. If you need to get anything done, this is the place to get it done. One of the things I really love about Sandton is how it lights up at night. If those lights don't inspire you, nothing will. Sandton is the richest square mile in Africa. It has everything, from shopping in Sandton City to 5-star hotels like a Michelangelo for my international guests. It works for me to be here. There are so many designer stores. There's an abundance of clothes and everything else to choose from. Being an entrepreneur, I travel a lot, so it's really convenient to be able to get onto the Gau train, and in 15 minutes, I'm at the airport. Business is important to me, but my family is everything, and that's why my family and I are looking to move into one of the suburbs in Sandton. Sandton has some of the most exclusive homes in the country, in places like Hyde Park and Sandown.